Late on the night of December 7, 1909, as a violent storm raged over Lake Erie, a young woman named Sarah Clancy awoke from a nightmare. She dreamt of a ship tossed about by a ferocious storm until it finally rolled over and sank. All the while, she heard the voice of her brother, John Clancy, a wheelsman on the car ferry Marquette and Bessemer No. 2, crying out for help. In the morning, her sisters laughed at her when she told them about her dream. But over the next several hours, with the car ferry now long overdue, stories emerged from all over Lake Erie of people who claimed to see or hear the ship struggling in the storm that night. Then, on December 12th, a grisly discovery was made some 15 miles from Erie, Pennsylvania. A lifeboat from the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2. It held 9 bodies. The clothing from a missing 10th man was found in the bottom of the boat. Even more strange, the body of steward George R. Smith was found with 2 large knives and a meat cleaver. A few months later, the body of Captain Robert McLeod was found with several slash wounds. With no survivors, and a wreck that still hasn't been found even to this day. What happened in the final moments before the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 met her end on Lake Erie has become one of the greatest mysteries of the Great Lakes. Hey crew, before we get started, I have a quick story to share. Earlier this year, I was curious about a cross-country move, so I reached out to a moving company to request a quote. Little did I know, this would become a plague on my life. Clearly, this company sold my information. I spent the next several months getting a constant barrage of phone calls, emails, and text messages from a bunch of different companies that I'd never even heard of. Once your information is out there, it feels like there's pretty much nothing you can do to get your privacy back. That's why I'm so excited to be working with this video sponsor, Conneaut. There are hundreds of data brokers out there who aggregate your personal information, potentially including your name, your social security number, your login credentials, location history, online activity, and much more. Once they get that information, they sell it to the highest bidder. The good news is that if you request them to remove this information, they legally have to do it. The problem is they make this really difficult to do, and it's almost impossible to even know what lists you're on in the first place. That's where Conneaut comes in. With one simple sign-up, Conneaut will reach out to data brokers on your behalf and request that they remove your information. And it's not just a one-time thing. They will monitor to make sure your data stays off the market and remove it whenever it inevitably pops up again. This keeps you safe and cuts down on all of that annoying spam. And now Conneaut has a special offer for the Big Old Boats crew. Use code OLDBOATS using the link below to get 60% off. It's a great deal that will help give you some peace of mind in this crazy world. Try it out. Alright, now back to the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2. On the morning of December 7th, 1909, Purser R.C. Smith stood on the dock at Conneaut, Ohio, and counted train cars as they were carefully loaded into the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2. It was a cold and windy morning. Storm flags whipped ominously on a tower overlooking the harbor. Smith, an experienced purser who recently transferred from the Ashtabula, another car ferry, counted 26 cars of coal, 3 cars of structural steel, and 1 car of iron castings. This voyage was typical for the car ferry, which operated a daily service between Conneaut, Ohio, and Port Stanley, Ontario. The ferry was relatively new, having been built only 4 years earlier in 1905 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Cleveland, Ohio, for the Marquette and Bessemer Dock and Navigation Company. She was designed to be a sturdy workhorse. Designated hull number 428, she came in at 350 feet or just under 107 meters long, with a beam of 54 feet or 16.5 meters. She was powered by a pair of triple expansion engines that drove twin screws and achieved a service speed of around 10 knots. Her cargo deck had 4 tracks that could hold a maximum of 30 rail cars. These cars were loaded into the ship through a large opening at her stern. She was not equipped with a closing gate, which left her open even while underway. This was a clear and known design flaw. The car ferry business was a challenging one that only proved profitable if the ferry continued operating as late into the season as possible, suspending service only when the lakes froze over and became impassable. The Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 and other ferries frequently got stuck in the ice and had to be blasted free. From her maiden voyage, the No. 2 was commanded by the well-respected Captain Robert McLeod. Of the 7 brothers in his family, 6 became sailors. He was joined on the No. 2 by his oldest brother, Captain John McLeod. While John could have commanded his own vessel, he chose to join his brother as first mate so that he could remain close to his wife and newly acquired property in Conneaut. This was one of the big advantages of working on a car ferry, and it's what attracted many of the crew members, most of which lived locally. The daily service to and from Port Stanley allowed the men to come home at night and spend much more time with family than a typical sailor. But after a difficult season, the crew began to doubt the ship's ability to handle rough weather. On another voyage in November of 1909, only a few weeks before, the No. 2 was caught in a fierce November gale. Due to the open stern, captains were instructed to sail directly into waves to keep water from flooding into the ship. But this was easier said than done. During the storm, as the ship was rocked by huge waves, a massive amount of water entered through the opening in her stern. She only barely escaped the ordeal. The crew was horribly shaken, and many worried that another storm would doom the ferry. Following this disastrous voyage, Captain McLeod complained to the company about the safety of the open stern, and they agreed that a gate would be installed at the end of the season. But in the meantime, the No. 2 would continue sailing, and on the morning of December 7th, as storm clouds built over Lake Erie, loading continued as normal. The Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 would occasionally carry passengers, and on this voyage, they would have just one. But as loading wrapped up, the lone passenger was nowhere to be found. At 6 a.m., the Marquette and Bessemer No. 1 left harbor, already facing rising southwest winds. The No. 2 was scheduled to leave at 8 a.m., but before they were able to cast off, an ore carrier that was being tied up for the winter snapped free in the high winds. Her stern swung out and blocked the narrow channel. After 2 hours, the carrier was finally secured, and Captain McLeod was able to cast off. He ordered his vessel slow ahead, but just as they began inching away, a man came running up the dock, calling for the ship to stop. Others on the dock and some of the crew noticed the man and echoed his calls. With a heavy sigh, Captain McLeod reversed his engines and allowed his stern to swing back toward the dock, where the man was able to jump aboard. He was the ship's lone passenger, Albert J. Weiss, treasurer of the Keystone Fish Company based in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was traveling on urgent business with a briefcase that reportedly held $50,000 that would be used to buy out a Canadian fishing company. With Purser Smith now showing the lone passenger to his cabin, the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 was finally ready to begin their long-delayed voyage. At 10:43 a.m., the ferry nosed out of the harbor and headed for the open lake. By this point, wind gusts were exceeding 50 miles per hour, with growing swells that broke hard over their bow. The mood on board was no doubt tense, as it was clear the storm would rival the one that nearly doomed the ship only a few weeks prior. At the west breakwater, they passed a small crew that was working to install a new fog signal. They could barely hear Captain McLeod, who stood on his bridge wing wearing his oilskins. He shouted, "Get that thing fixed, I may need it on my trip back." The man in charge of the work, Conneaut lightkeeper Edward Pfister, was good friends with the captain. He waved with a smile and rang the fog bell. But conditions rapidly deteriorated, forcing the crew to abandon the work for the day. That morning, the temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. But as the No. 2 sailed into the storm, the temperature had plummeted to just 10 degrees. Snow soon began to fall, and by late afternoon, a full gale had descended over Lake Erie. The small crew was the last confirmed sighting of the ship and her crew. As darkness fell, the storm continued to grow, with 75-mile-per-hour winds, monstrous waves, and whiteout conditions. Somewhere in the maelstrom, the crew of the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 were fighting for their lives. In the early evening of December 7th, a Canadian customs officer, Mr. Wheeler, watched as the storm raged over Lake Erie from his home in Port Stanley, Ontario. At around 6 p.m., he saw the unmistakable mass of the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 fighting through the massive waves near the entrance to the harbor. The wind and waves lashed at the massive ship, making it impossible to navigate the narrow harbor entrance. Soon, according to Mr. Wheeler, the ship turned west, perhaps seeking shelter in Rondeau, and disappeared. As the storm raged on, Mr. Wheeler went to bed. Then, at 3 a.m., he was awoken by the sounds of the car ferry's distinctive whistle, blasting somewhere near the harbor entrance. 2 other Port Stanley residents also claimed to hear these whistles. About 7 miles east of Port Stanley, in the small town of Bruce, a man was awoken at 5 a.m. that morning to the sounds of a steamer blasting its whistle. He claimed that the sounds were so loud he thought the ship had run aground. He ran outside to investigate, but he couldn't find the ship through the whiteout, despite the persistent blasts. Soon the sounds faded until he could only hear the wind and pounding surf. These witness stories, covering 12 hours, would suggest that the No. 2 made it to her destination on the north shore of the lake and then struggled to find a place to safely wait out the storm. But strangely, numerous witnesses on the south shore also claimed to have seen or heard the ill-fated car ferry all through that night. At around 1:30 a.m., a Hewlett ore unloader operator at Conneaut Harbor named William Rice was outside the cab of his machine when he heard the car ferry's whistle somewhere in the storm. He described hearing 4 short blasts and then 5 short blasts, which he thought was her anchor signal. Then the blasts repeated until they stopped completely around 15 minutes later. Other workers at the harbor and a local resident heard the same signals. These witnesses would have known the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 very well. She was one of the largest ships on Lake Erie at the time and navigated that same harbor daily. They would recognize that whistle. A steamer named Black was anchored not far just outside the breakwater at Conneaut. The storm was too rough for them to navigate the narrow harbor. During the night, both her captain and chief engineer claimed to have witnessed the distinctive profile of the car ferry past their ship, heading east. And just east of Conneaut, late in the evening, a Finnish woman who lived in the area claimed to have heard and seen the No. 2. She immediately recognized the whistle, and when she looked out, she saw both a white middle light and red and green lights, suggesting the vessel was heading directly toward her on shore. Fearing that the ship might run aground, she placed a light in her window to help them navigate. She then saw only a green light, indicating a sharp turn to port, and then just the ship's taillights. If accurate, this would mean the ship was heading for shore and then made an abrupt turn and sailed back for the open lake. Many of these sightings, all occurring on the night of December 7th or in the early morning hours of December 8th, directly contradict one another. In normal conditions, it would take the No. 2 5 hours to sail between Conneaut and Port Stanley. The ship couldn't have been on both sides of the lake at the same time. At least some of these witnesses must have been mistaken. But it's strange how many, on both sides of the lake, shared consistent stories at around the same times. It's reasonable to assume that at some point Captain McLeod realized conditions were too rough to navigate the narrow channel at Port Stanley and diverted his ship to find a safe place to wait out the storm. Whether he turned back to Conneaut or sought shelter somewhere else is hard to determine, but it's clear that at some point in the night, the car ferry was overtaken by the storm, forcing the crew to abandon ship. None of them would survive the night. By the morning of December 8, 1909, the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 had not arrived in Port Stanley or returned to Conneaut. At first, this was not cause for alarm. It was presumed that the ship sought shelter somewhere in the lake, perhaps off Long Point. She did not have wireless equipment on board that night, though there were apparently plans to install this equipment on the ship soon. Before wireless was widely adopted, it wasn't uncommon, especially after a storm, for ships to go missing for several hours or even days. Still, her sister ship, the Marquette and Bessemer No. 1, was sent to search for the missing vessel. But no traces were found until December 10th, when the bulk freighter SS William B. Davik sailed through a debris field west of the tip of Long Point. In addition to several chunks of woodwork, likely from the ship's superstructure, they also spotted an abandoned lifeboat. While they didn't see a name on any of the debris to indicate what ship it came from, They noted that many of the pieces and the lifeboat were painted green, the same color as much of the No. 2 superstructure. Not seeing any signs of life or bodies, the William B. Davik, wishing to maintain her schedule, sailed through the debris field without stopping or picking anything up. They would later be criticized for this move, especially not taking a closer look at the lifeboat. But a few days later, on Sunday, December 12th, the most grisly traces of the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 were discovered by Captain Jeremiah A. Driscoll of the Pennsylvania State Fish Commissioner's tug, the Commodore Perry, while searching for the missing ship. Floating some 15 miles off the shore of Erie, Pennsylvania, they discovered the car ferry's lifeboat No. 4. It held the frozen bodies of 9 crew members in clothing that belonged to a 10th man, who was believed to have suffered paradoxical undressing during the late stages of hypothermia and jumped overboard. None of the bodies were dressed in warm clothing, suggesting that they abandoned their ship quickly. But the strangest discovery was found on the body of steward George Smith, who had 2 knives and a large meat cleaver from the galley. Soon more debris was discovered on the shore near Port Burwell, Ontario, including the ship's second lifeboat and a buoyancy tank from a third lifeboat. The fourth and final lifeboat wasn't discovered until the spring of 1910, when it was found broken in two on a breakwater near the harbor in Buffalo, New York. No bodies were found in or near any of these other 3 lifeboats. The bodies of only 5 other crewmen were discovered in the months that followed. First mate John McLeod was found on April 6, 1910, in the Niagara River, frozen in the intakes of the Niagara Falls Power Company. His brother, Captain Robert McLeod, was found in Kincardine, Ontario, on October 6, 1910. The body of Sarah Clancy's brother, wheelsman John Clancy, was never found. The captain's body had sustained numerous slash wounds. This discovery was quickly linked by some to the knives found on the body of steward George Smith. In one of the most detailed accounts of the tragedy, and a main source for this video, Ghost Ships of the Great Lakes, published in 1968, author Dwight speculates that as the ship took on water, there could have been some type of altercation between the officers and the lower-ranking crew who might have prematurely tried to abandon the ship. But it's important to remember that this is just speculation, with no real evidence to back it up. The captain's body spent 10 months in the lake, and the slash wounds could have come from any number of things during the sinking or after. What happened in those final moments will never be known, but one can imagine the hell Captain McLeod went through that night as he battled the storm in a ship that he knew couldn't handle such brutal conditions. While the exact location where the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 went down remains a mystery, what caused the sinking in the first place is easier to determine. There was no official investigation at the time, but most assumed that the open stern allowed the storm's massive waves to flood into the ship's cargo hold until she lost stability and foundered. With no survivors or witnesses, how exactly this went down isn't entirely clear. The flooding could have occurred over time, with multiple waves washing into the ship, forcing open access panels and extinguishing her boilers, rendering the ship powerless in the storm. But it's also possible that one large wave flooded through her stern and sent her plunging to the bottom in just minutes. This would actually reflect what happened only a few weeks prior, when the ship nearly sank in a similar storm after a large wave flooded through her stern. 33 crew members and 1 passenger lost their lives on the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2, though some sources suggest there may have been as many as 38 crew members on board that night. The Marquette and Bessemer Dock and Navigation Company almost immediately ordered a replacement vessel. Built using almost the exact same plans, the new Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 entered service on October 6, 1910. Ironically, the same day Captain McLeod's body was discovered. The replacement ship was equipped with a stern gate. The company was criticized for using the exact same name for this new ship, indicating that they were eager to erase the tragedy from memory. The replacement ship had a long and varied career until she was finally scrapped in 1997. The wreck of the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 has never been found. She remains one of the most sought-after wrecks in the Great Lakes. Time and again, People have claimed to find her, but upon investigation, all of these claims have proven to be other ships. With so many contradictory witness statements from that night, determining where she went down is a daunting task. It's been over 100 years since the tragedy, but the descendants of the men who lost their lives that night have kept the memory of their relatives alive. The fabric of that memory remains strong, and the search continues. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think happened that night? How did so many witnesses, miles apart, all claim to see and hear the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 at around the same time? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, help out the channel by leaving a like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Thank you again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Check them out using the link below. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon. They told me I look good in these jeans, and that gave me the confidence to face another day. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.